America. Industrialization was mainly a process occurring in the north, but the south was catching on quickly. Once needing to ship their goods somewhere else to be manufactured, factories were being put up right there on the farms. Many businessmen feared the power of the South to industrialize, once it recognized all the materials it had to cultivate. Segregation was still wildly popular in the South, and this played over into labor organizations. African Americans found work wherever they could, but they were generally underprivileged and prohibited from joining labor unions. Their jobs in the city defined the rest of their life, usually being overworked and not wanting to do anything after work except go drink and forget about it. The cities were full of crime and filth, resulting in less than standard living conditions.
Why hello, I, Professor Gronset, have been analyzing technology from the Progressive Era for the last couple of years. These, my friends, are my findings. In the Progressive Era, new inventions and technologies were being invented. America was producing 1/3 of the world's goods, and by 1900 an estimated $13 billion worth of goods was being made. This might lead one to wonder, what was going on in America? Well, sport, at the end of the Civil War, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869. This made a web of U.S. trains connecting the USA. It was now finally possible to have a national market. Resources such as coal and iron can now be transported easier, and industrial and technological advancements are making jobs left and right. Perfect, because America, with immigrants pouring in, was looking to become the centerpiece of the world. Look at this, an automobile, an invention of the grand Mr. Henry Ford. Ford, a former electrical engineer, created the internal combustion engine, and in doing so, created the modern-day car. Ford was also a genius at business. He created tactics in his assembly line that are still used in modern-day car manufacturing. Also, he paid his employees twice the standard industry pay in an attempt to create skilled labor. But above all, he was an opportunist. Quoting, "It's always possible to do things better the second time." So Americans were moving on trains and cars, while two brothers from North Carolina found it as well lame. Wilbur and Orville Wright had the idea of flight. When the Wright brothers invented the 1903 Flyer, they had made history with the first ever aeroplane. They patented the Flyer and had started a new era of flight. Flight was not yet useful for transportation, but it would play a major role in the upcoming wars. We won't go into that, but the age-old accomplishment of achieving flight had been done here, in America. A feat that would glorify the nation. Another thing taking place in this hectic fiesta of new technology was the shift from steam to electricity. Electricity required copper wiring, which ended up growing the industry of copper making 10 times from what it was in 1880. The call for all this electricity was partly due to Edison's invention of the light bulb. Edison, like Ford, ran his own business of selling his invention, making him extremely wealthy. The Edison Light Company was revolutionizing both urban and industrial life with the ability to illuminate what was once dark. Another great invention of this time was one by someone you probably know, Alexander Graham Bell. Graham's invention of the telephone, for the most part, would replace the telegraph. Bell wrote in 1878,
"It is possible to connect every man's house, office, or factory with a central station, so as to give him direct communication with his neighbors."
Bell had connected the world with technology we still use today. See, the technology from the progressive era is still used today. The car, the plane, the light bulb, the phone, these are still used today, and they shape your everyday life. Technology was easing its way into the life of the everyday American, taking us into the future of a more productive nation. And America was at the centerpiece of this production and advancement, making it the ultimate nation.
Good evening, my friends. If you are watching my program, which I'm assuming you are, then you are about to be informed about new organizational systems. The progressive era would breed many progressive new organizational systems to progressively organize the people of the United States. Progressive. Socially, the people began to band together into powerful movements. One such movement was the Patrons of Husbandry. The Patrons of Husbandry were a secret Masonic society involving stores, costumes, passwords, and songs. They were influential enough to get a few shipping bills passed before collapsing under the economic strain of the recession of the 1870s. The Patrons were also a very philosophicalist society, attracting various intellectuals into their group. In the preamble of the Constitution of the Patron of Husbandry, it states, and I quote, "The prosperity of a nation is in proportion to the value of its production, and knowledge is the foundation of happiness." Other influential organizations of the time were the WCTU, the AFL, and the IWW. This leads us to deduce that the people of the progressive era loved acronyms. In actuality, the WCTU, or Women's Christian Temperance Union, was a women's organization based on the eradication of alcoholism, while the AFL and IWW were two of the most influential unions of the time. The declaration of the WCTU states, and I quote, "I hereby solemnly promise, God helping, to abstain from all distilled, fermented, and malt liquors." Politically, there was a vast reorganization of all public administration. Government was expanded at every level, regulating everything from the market to other aspects of life. Political parties began to act as state and local organizations, while recruiting took place at the local levels. Campaigns, contrastingly, became mass spectacles. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act reorganized civil service, declaring that government jobs should be merit-based, and I quote, "that no person habitually using intoxicating beverages to excess shall be appointed to or retain any office." As well as civil service reform, the modern apparatus of bureaus, departments, and cabinets began to appear, and the federal judiciary got an overhaul with the Circuit Court of Appeals Act. The Circuit Court of Appeals Act, or the Judiciary Act of 1891, declared that the Supreme Court could review any case it wanted to, as well as created the Circuit Court of Appeals, drastically lowering the Supreme Court's workload. And I quote, "In each circuit, a Circuit Court of Appeals, which shall consist of 3 judges." Transitioning to economic organizational systems, there's a complete reorganization of labor, including new technologies, better factories, and of course, the assembly line. Even businesses were reorganizing themselves into either horizontal or vertical integration models. Horizontal integration meant controlling the entire market at one stage of production, while vertical meant controlling a product from raw material to the final product. And now we will go to our historical expert for a Howard Zinn perspective. Unfortunately, our historical expert is incapable of speech, but here's what Zinn had to say. And I quote, "The corporates control the people through the people's own money." This time period saw a complete reorganization of how things were produced. Pre-Progressive era, 4 tons of steel could be produced in one day. Thanks largely to Carnegie, this process went down to 15 minutes. New organizational systems were extremely influential in this time period.
To make money honestly is to preach the gospel.
In an era of thriving economic capitalism, wealth is poorly distributed among the classes. Although the immigrant wage and working lower class was lacking in economic security, opportunity and fortune lay in the future for a minuscule portion of the population. The remarkably wealthy group of this time period had already developed its own ideologies regarding prosperity. That is to say, the accumulation of capital played as much into the rich's spiritual life as it did any other aspect. It commonly became known as the gospel of wealth, a phrase coined in a book by one of the principal entrepreneurs of the time period, Andrew Carnegie. Among the more famous personalities of the era, Andrew Carnegie was both a brilliant worker and investor. After working and studying in his early years, he produced the majority of his wealth in railroad management and investments, and later in the steel industry. As Andrew Carnegie quotes in his book,
"Surplus wealth is a sacred trust which its possessor is bound to administer in his lifetime for the good of the community."
The gospel of wealth preached that if you were willing to do what it takes, extreme amounts of wealth were within your grasp. The American public fell in love with rags to riches stories, mainly of which were told by Horatio Alger in his novels. The nation then began to use wealth as the major measurement of a man's greatness, a sort of social Darwinism. Other notable business tycoons such as Jay Gould, John D. Rockefeller, Philip Armour, and James Mellon helped to create the idea known as conspicuous consumption from the idea of the gospel of wealth. This consumption was really conspicuous. I mean, epically conspicuous. The wealthier would purchase an abundance of impractical luxuries simply for the sake of displaying their wealth. The wealthy would purchase an abundance of impractical luxuries simply for the purpose of displaying their richness. After the cake and champagne, however, these businessmen led the nation in its philanthropy. Countless museums, universities, and public spaces received large grants from the corporate leaders. It is paradoxical, then, that these men might be so abusive to their workers to get wealthy, but once they acquired the wealth, to give so much of it away. One cartoonist, Joseph Kepler, published this piece in a magazine in 1888 depicting the ability these quote-unquote philanthropists had to control and manipulate the railroads and telegraph systems. Along with this new upper class came a new type of middle class. The middle class experienced a fair... Hey, can you guys knock it off?
Sorry.
The new middle class experienced a fair amount of economic security.
Men would commute from their private homes to their workplace in the city, leaving the wife and kids at home, and then return to the privacy of their home, ready for leisure time, including sports games, recreation in the parks, and concerts.
At home, a comfortable living situation distanced from the workplace was key. Women were generally in charge of home decoration, and magazines like Harriet Spofford's Art Decoration set the norm. Shrubs, fences, plants, furniture, pictures, and wallpaper. These were all about to become part of the standard in American homes. As Spofford quotes in her art decoration article,
Providing there is space to move around without knocking over the furniture, there is hardly likely to be much in the room.
The middle class also took a liking to education. Education was universal to the youth that were white and mostly male. Interesting. Now, the number of public high schools did grow tremendously from 1870 to 1900. In fact, the number doubled 5 times. Universities were being built at a rapid pace. Although universities initially enrolled only men, coeducation women's colleges became a larger percentage of the education system. African Americans were beginning to open up their own universities, beginning with Tuskegee in 1881. The gospel of wealth, conspicuous consumption, and the new middle class were the important ideological pieces of the progressive era.
The media had a pretty colossal role in determining how the public viewed tycoons and entrepreneurs of the Gilded Age. Jay Gould was nicknamed by the newspapers the worst man in the world. It's a pretty bad title, thanks to his unethical business ventures. Conversely, Andrew Carnegie gained the title the richest man in the world. This title wasn't so bad after all. This was a result of Andrew Carnegie's richness and his philanthropy. This also showed considerable media bias towards certain heads of corporations. The common man decided he would like a slice of the money. Thus, he and his other common men decided to create one of the most powerful political machines of the Gilded Era, the labor union. The Knights of Labor was one of the first powerful union associations in the United States of America. It was led by a man who some would say had the most versatile name in American history, Grand Master Workman Terence V. Powderly. Together with his other master workmen, Powderly attempted to fight for the 8-hour day and died 40 years later for it, but that was of natural causes. Thus, the Knights of Labor were a force to be reckoned with in this era. In the South, things weren't going as peachy. A group called the Red Shirts was gaining power, and these folks, led by Captain Ellison Alger Smith, didn't like African Americans voting. He didn't like them taking jobs either. Thus, he enforced a whites-only policy at his own mill, and eventually became a textile baron and a politician. He then used his newfound political power to spread racism as far as his eye could see. Luckily, the Knights of Labor here came to the rescue and managed to incorporate both black and white workers into their unions. However, it was not to be, as racist newspapers twisted the news and demonized it so that the Knights could no longer continue with this movement. And then,
Whoa. I think we need some opinions from history's chosen one, Howard Zinn.
Howard Zinn could not make it tonight.
Moving right along.
politicians of the era were a little bit corruptible. President Grover Cleveland ran as the common man candidate. However, shortly after reaching his office, he received a telegram from none other than Andrew Carnegie himself.
Carnegie.
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 Carnegius.
Carnegie. The message read, "I believe the business interests of this country will be safe in your hands." And Carnegie was right. Grover Cleveland did nothing to stop the the raging business that was going on in our country. Well, that was a shady move by Carthaginian. But anyways, the next president, Benjamin Harrison, you may know him as the grandson of William Henry Harrison, the one who died about a week after getting into office. Benjamin Harrison was already heavily affiliated with the railroads, so naturally, he sided with them at almost every opportunity. William McKinley helped the American industry by introducing what became known as the highest tariff in American history, the Dingley Tariff. The Dingley Tariff raised rates up to 57% at times on imports. It had the desired effect though. It brought the US out of our depression and rebooted the economy. President McKinley also successfully managed the Spanish-American War and did well enough to have a mountain named after him. McKinley, however, was eclipsed after his assassination by an anarchist by the next president, a man whose name you likely know, Theodore Roosevelt. This just in, Teddy Roosevelt was not named after the teddy bear. The bear was named after him. Senator Mark Hanna said of Roosevelt upon hearing the news of McKinley's assassination, "Oh my God, that damn cowboy's in the White House." And a cowboy he was. Even in the White House, Roosevelt became known as the trust buster due to the fact that he enforced American antitrust policy rigidly and targeted corrupt business very successfully. Roosevelt passed some powerful legislature, including the Antiquities Act of 1906. The Antiquities Act protected any monument that could be designated as an American artifact by power of the government, and thus removed the ability of corporations to abuse said artifacts. He also passed the Pure Food and Drug Act in the same year. This act had a much greater effect on the corporations of the era, as it established quality control for the sale of foodstuffs and drugs. If someone sells products that violate this act, their first offense would have a maximum punishment of $500, and every subsequent offense, a minimal punishment of $1,000. Woodrow Wilson
Woodrow
Wilson followed his predecessors and passed the Clayton Antitrust Act in 1914, which outlawed discriminatory pricing and tightened the chokehold on corrupt bribery. Sorry, I had to run. I'll finish now. Politicians of the era promised the poor an era of prosperity and political opportunity. They didn't give it to them, though.
This was our documentary.
We hope you found it informative.
And a little bit entertaining.
And worthy of an A.